You think of ancient Rome, and maybe your mind paints a picture of towering marble columns, grand amphitheatres echoing with speeches, and streets alive with merchants selling wine, olives, and silk. The smell of fresh bread mixing with the iron tang of blood from the nearby Colosseum. A city that called itself the centre of the world. Rome, the empire of law, architecture, and philosophy. The so-called blueprint of Western civilization. But beneath the polished marble, behind the rhetoric of senators and poets, lay something far darker. A system of rules, traditions, and rituals so meticulously crafted that it turned women's bodies into property, into tools, into sacrifices. For Rome, civilization didn't mean protecting women, it meant controlling them. It meant legalizing cruelty. It meant codifying humiliation in ink and marble, as if misery itself was part of the law. Imagine walking through a bustling Roman forum. The crowd roars as a senator addresses the masses. Scrolls of law are displayed proudly, laws about contracts, trade, justice, but read closely, and those very laws reveal loopholes that make modern sexism look tame. In Rome, a woman wasn't an individual, she was a possession her father could trade, her husband could command, her state could silence. This wasn't chaos, this wasn't some underground culture, it was official policy, taught, enforced, celebrated. And yet, Rome bragged of its civility. Writers praised its justice system, philosophers praised its reason. But behind those praises was a chilling truth. Every legal advance, every code, came with invisible chains wrapped around women. If this sounds shocking already, hit subscribe so you don't miss the darker secrets ahead. Because what you've heard so far is just the beginning. Rome's story is not one of elegance, it's one of exploitation. And soon, you'll see just how far the empire was willing to go to preserve male power. From forcing girls into virginity prisons, to turning rape into a legal contract, to executing women for imagined sins. The grandeur of Rome was built on misery. Marble palaces rose from the blood of women silenced and enslaved. And as we pull back the curtain on this empire, the image of civilization will crumble into something monstrous. But if you think marriage was sacred, wait until you see how Rome buried little girls alive. Literally, marriage, a word that today carries echoes of love, union, and family. In Rome, it carried something else entirely: ownership. When a Roman woman married, she didn't simply become a wife, she became property, legally, officially, completely. The Romans even had a word for it: manus, literally the hand. Because the husband's hand now reached over every aspect of her life, her body, her property, even her name. Once the ceremony was complete, she ceased to exist as an independent person. She could not own land, she could not sign contracts, she could not even make the smallest life choices without her husband's permission. To the Roman mind, this wasn't cruel, it was natural. A woman was seen as incapable of reason, a vessel of chaos that needed control, and marriage was the leash. But the cruelty didn't end there. You might imagine at least she chose her husband. Wrong. In many cases, she had no choice. Her father decided. He could hand her to another man the same way he handed over property or livestock. A daughter wasn't a person to cherish. She was an investment to trade. Picture the scene: a Roman villa, a father seated with a prospective son-in-law. They sip wine, negotiating not her happiness, but her dowry. In the background, the girl stands silently, her future decided without her voice. The ink dries on a contract, and just like that, her identity is erased. And this wasn't rare. It wasn't scandalous. It was normal, celebrated even. Senators boasted of advantageous marriages, Poets joked about the obedience of wives. Society applauded when a woman knew her place. But here's the sinister twist. Rome wrapped this oppression in the language of the divine. The gods, they claimed, sanctioned it. Jupiter himself demanded that women submit, that their lives bend under the authority of men. Refusing wasn't just rebellion against a husband, it was blasphemy. In Rome, marriage wasn't the start of a partnership, it was the start of a sentence. A life lived in someone else's shadow, someone else's hand, and yet, believe it or not, for some women, marriage wasn't even the cruelest fate, because Rome reserved its most horrifying punishment for its so-called holiest women: eternal virginity, or a living grave. Imagine being just 6 years old. Your world is dolls, games, and laughter in the courtyard. Then, without warning, priests arrive at your family's home. They study your face, your ancestry, even the shape of your hands. And if they decide you're chosen, your childhood ends that day. You're selected, not for freedom, not for love, but for a lifetime of enforced purity. This was the fate of the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most sacred women. Selected between the ages of 6 and 10, they were sworn to 30 years of celibacy, 3 decades of silence, obedience, and service to the goddess Vesta. On the surface, it looked like an honour. They were granted privileges, fine homes, front-row seats at games, even political influence. To the Romans, they symbolised holiness and protection for the city itself. But behind the grandeur, the reality was stark. Their task was to guard the eternal flame of Vesta, a flame that could never be allowed to die. And their vow of chastity was absolute. Breaking it was considered not just personal failure, but a curse on Rome itself, and the punishment. It was severe and irreversible. A Vestal who violated her vows faced ritualized execution, hidden from the public eye. She would be entombed underground, given symbolic offerings of food and water, so her death could be framed as fate, not direct violence. To Rome, this cruelty was ceremony. To the women, it was a slow erasure. Think about that. Children chosen before they even understood the word choice, lives shaped not by their will, but by the empire's obsession with purity. Virginity wasn't just demanded, it was weaponized. And here lies the contradiction. Rome celebrated enforced celibacy as sacred, while at the very same time, it legalized and profited from prostitution. But Rome's hypocrisy ran deeper, because while chastity was sacred, prostitution was a state-approved business. If virginity was sacred in Rome, prostitution was state-approved. The empire had a legal category called infamia, a mark of dishonour so powerful it erased a woman's rights in a single stroke. And here's the chilling part, she didn't even have to sell sex to be branded. A father could register his daughter as a prostitute. A husband could register his wife. No trial, no proof, not even consent. Just an accusation, promiscuous. And her status was changed forever, from citizen to meretrix. Once branded, there was no escape. She could never marry. She could never testify in court. She could never inherit property. Society stripped her of personhood, reducing her to what one historian calls a municipal utility. A woman downgraded from human being to public service. Now imagine the streets of Rome during Saturnalia, the great festival of chaos. The air thick with wine and smoke, music echoing through alleys, men in masks laughing wildly. In the shadows, poor women and enslaved girls are pulled into doorways, offered to powerful men as part of the celebration, their bodies treated like festival favours. Voluntary? That word didn't exist. For women born into poverty or slavery, sexual service wasn't a choice, it was demanded, by law, by custom, by empire. Rome, the civilization that executed Vestals for breaking celibacy, turned around and forced countless women into prostitution to entertain its elites. Virginity was punished, sexuality was punished, and yet exploitation was celebrated. This wasn't contradiction, this was policy, a double standard so sharp it cut across every level of society, and it only gets darker. Because when a woman was raped in Rome, the law didn't protect her, it protected the man who owned her. And when it came to rape, the law wasn't protecting women, it was protecting furniture. In ancient Rome, rape was not defined as a crime against a woman, it was defined as a crime against property. A woman's body was never considered her own. It belonged to her father, her husband, or her master. If she was attacked, the outrage was not that she'd been violated, but that someone else's possession had been damaged. Picture a Roman courtroom, marble walls, senators seated in judgment, the accused standing tall, and the victim? She's not permitted to speak. Her voice is irrelevant. The case is argued not on her behalf, but on behalf of the man who legally owned her. The language is chilling. Legal scrolls described rape in the same breath as theft, vandalism, and destruction of property, as if a woman's body were a dented chariot or a stolen goat. And the solutions Rome offered? Even worse than the crime itself. In many cases, the rapist could avoid punishment entirely by marrying the woman he assaulted. Yes, marriage as reparation, the trauma sealed with a legally binding contract. Sorry I destroyed your dignity. Let's make it official. What choice did the woman have? None. Refusal wasn't an option. Her consent didn't exist. Rome disguised lifelong imprisonment with the language of matrimony. And when her family pursued justice, the punishment often fell not on the man, but on her. A daughter who brought shame could be disowned, beaten, or even killed by her own father, all under the protection of Roman law. So let's be clear, in Rome, rape was not a wound against a woman's humanity. It was a technical injury to a man's pride, his property, his reputation. And the victim? She was silenced twice, once by the assault, and again by the law. Rome prided itself on being the birthplace of justice, but its courts were mausoleums where women's voices were buried long before their bodies ever were. And if you think this was the darkest cruelty, think again. Because Rome didn't just punish women for being assaulted, it also devised barbaric methods to test their purity. Tests so absurd, so humiliating, they make your skin crawl. And if a girl's virginity was questioned, Rome had ways of testing it that will make your skin crawl. Rome's obsession with controlling women reached its most humiliating form in the so-called virginity tests. Families obsessed over whether a daughter was untouched, not because they cared about her dignity, but because her virginity was currency, a guarantee of property value, a guarantee of male pride. And so, absurd rituals became law. One test involved giving a girl a potion of saffron, wine and herbs. If she vomited, she was declared pure. If she didn't, she was branded experienced. Her entire life, her chance at marriage, decided by whether she threw up in front of strangers. Another ritual was worse, a barefoot walk over raw eggs. If the shells cracked, shame. If they stayed whole, purity. Imagine being 16, nerves shaking your legs, stepping on fragile shells while your future balances on each crunch. One slip, one accident, and you were condemned. These weren't symbolic games, they determined destiny. A girl who failed could be disowned, unmarriageable, cast out, all because of tests that had no science, no truth, just superstition wrapped in cruelty. And for Rome, that was enough. It didn't matter if a girl was kind, clever, or capable. What mattered was whether she passed a humiliating ritual dreamed up by men who saw women not as people, but as vessels to guard or discard. Virginity was a cage, purity a weapon, and superstition was the judge. But if superstition ruined lives, Rome's medicine destroyed them. But if superstition ruined lives, Rome's medicine destroyed them. If virginity was policed with superstition, fertility was attacked with violence. In Rome, a woman's worth was tied to one thing: her ability to produce heirs. And if she could not conceive quickly enough, the blame fell entirely on her. Never the husband, never the man, always the woman. Doctors, if you can even call them that, prescribe treatments that sound less like medicine and more like torture. One method, fumigation of the womb, burning herbs and animal dung placed beneath a woman's body, the smoke forced inside to chase away evil spirits. Imagine lying helpless while your most vulnerable self is treated like a chimney. Another, wine enemas. Warm wine poured into the body as if intoxication could trick the womb into obedience. And then came the more grotesque practices. Strips of wool soaked in crushed animal liver, inserted as a supposed cure. Beatings administered to the pelvis under the belief that violence could stir up fertility. Picture that. A woman assaulted not as punishment but as medicine. It was medical theatre. Pain disguised as treatment. And every failed pregnancy deepened the blame. Defective. Cursed. Words whispered behind closed doors, poisoning her reputation. Meanwhile, the men remained blameless. A husband's infertility was rarely considered. Roman science declared the problem could only be female, convenient, cruel, and deadly. The emotional toll was immense. Women prayed at temples, endured endless rituals, and submitted to agonizing procedures, while society watched, judged, and mocked. Rome's version of family planning wasn't nurturing, it was brutal conditioning. And as horrific as this was for freeborn Roman women, there was an even darker fate awaiting others. Because for enslaved women, there was no choice, no escape, and no illusion of healing. Their bodies weren't just controlled, they were owned. And for enslaved women, the nightmare had no escape. Because their bodies weren't just controlled, they were owned. If freeborn women were bound by law, enslaved women were bound by chains. For them, there was no illusion of honour, no protection of purity. Their lives were not shielded by rights. They were treated as property. In Rome, the expectation of exploitation wasn't hidden. It was normalised. A master's control over an enslaved woman was seen as unquestioned authority. Consent, choice, even humanity itself was stripped away. And the children born to these women, they were not freed. They too were stamped with the mark of enslavement, caught in a cycle designed to reproduce servitude generation after generation. Rome had transformed exploitation into a breeding system for its empire. Picture a senator's banquet. Golden lamps flicker against marble walls. Wine flows as powerful men recline on couches, their laughter echoing in the hall, and among them stand enslaved girls, some alarmingly young, expected to serve, to dance, to amuse their master's guests. For them, survival meant performance, obedience dressed up as entertainment. The bitterest irony. Rome's own poets made jokes about it. Writers like Juvenal and Martial casually mocked the lives of enslaved girls, reducing their pain into punchlines for the educated elite. What was tragedy for the powerless became comedy for the powerful. This wasn't hidden depravity, it was public culture. Slave markets displayed women as if they were livestock. Brothels turned profits not for the women forced inside them, but for their masters. In wealthy households, they were paraded as trophies of prestige, as though they were exotic possessions rather than human beings. For the Roman elite, owning women was a mark of status. For the enslaved women themselves, it was a nightmare without end. Their voices silenced, their suffering ignored. their humanity erased by law itself, because in Rome's eyes, you could not wrong property. That was Rome. Not civilization, but commodification. Not glory, but chains. And yet, even this horror was not the empire's cruelest spectacle. Because when women were merely accused of misconduct, Rome didn't just humiliate them, it turned their punishment into public entertainment. But when women were accused of misconduct, the punishment was far worse than humiliation. It was execution by spectacle. Accusation in Rome was often a death sentence, not proof, not evidence, just accusation. If a woman was suspected of adultery, promiscuity, or dishonour, her fate could be sealed not in a courtroom, but in an arena. The punishment was called damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Picture the scene, a packed amphitheatre, tens of thousands of spectators, their voices rising like a storm, the scent of sweat, wine, and blood thick in the air. Trumpets blare. A gate creaks open, and into the sunlit sand a woman is dragged, stripped, bound, trembling. She is no gladiator, no warrior. She has no weapon, no training. She has only her fear. From the shadows the beasts emerge, lions, leopards, bears. The crowd roars as the animals circle her, as if this were sport, not slaughter. And then, in front of a cheering audience, Rome delivers its version of justice. This wasn't myth. This wasn't rare. Women accused of infidelity, even without proof, could be thrown to wild animals in a display of public morality theatre. A grotesque spectacle to remind others of the cost of stepping outside the empire's rules. And even when execution wasn't ordered, humiliation was. Women might be paraded half naked through the streets, branded, or have their hair publicly shorn as the crowd jeered. Imagine walking past neighbours, friends, strangers, every eye on you, every whisper a knife, because your father, your husband, or your master accused you. It wasn't about justice, it was about control. Public suffering as a warning, a message. Your body, your life, your very reputation belong not to you, but to Rome. And yet even women who embraced art, performance, or skill could not escape condemnation. Because Rome found new ways to turn their talent into shame. Even performers and entertainers weren't safe. Rome branded their talent as sexual shame. Rome loved spectacle, music, theatre, dance, gladiatorial combat. Crowds filled arenas to be dazzled, shocked, and entertained. But for women who stepped onto that stage, the price of performance was degradation. Actresses, dancers, singers. No matter how talented, respected, or adored, they were automatically branded infames, infamous, a legal category that stripped them of protections, barred them from marriage, and placed them at the mercy of powerful men. To perform in public was, by Roman logic, to expose your body, your voice, your femininity. And that alone was enough to erase your rights. Talent wasn't celebrated, it was punished. Even worse were the gladiatrices, female gladiators, forced into the arena in skimpy armour, paraded like exotic curiosities for male entertainment. Their fights weren't about skill or survival, they were about titillation. The crowd wanted spectacle. Women bleeding in the sand, mocked, degraded and objectified before the final blow. And when the fighting ended, their humiliation didn't. Many were sold for sex to wealthy spectators, packaged as part of the evening's entertainment. A grotesque aftershow where the line between sport and exploitation vanished completely. This was Rome's entertainment industry, a system where women's talent, bodies, and suffering were consumed for pleasure. Their artistry turned against them, their dignity stripped away with the roar of the crowd. For Rome, exploitation wasn't just tolerated, it was the headline act. But the empire's obsession with sex didn't stop at theatres and arenas. It reached into the temples cloaked in incense and prayer, sanctified as holy ritual. But Rome's obsession with sex wasn't just entertainment, it was religion itself. If Rome turned theatres and arenas into stages of exploitation, its temples became chambers of sanctioned abuse. Take the cult of Bona Dea, the so-called good goddess. On the surface, her ceremonies looked empowering. Only women could attend. Men were forbidden. Sacred rituals of purity, fertility, and protection for the city. But the reality was far darker. Enslaved women were often forced into these rituals, their bodies offered as vessels of purification. What Rome called worship was in practice institutionalized sexual sacrifice. Imagine it. Torchlight flickering against temple walls, smoke of incense clouding the air, women masked, veils hiding their faces. The wine flows freely, but it's not for celebration, it's forced intoxication, a ritual to loosen resistance, and then came the so-called sacred acts, orgies masked as offerings, ritual penetrations performed with objects or by high-ranking men claiming to embody the gods. Acts of violence reframed as devotion. To Rome, this was holy. To the women trapped inside, it was horror dressed in robes of piety. The contradiction is staggering. Female sexuality outside the temple, branded as shameful, punishable by death. Female sexuality inside the temple, exploited, sanctified, applauded. Rome had perfected the art of control. Label a woman's desire as filthy, but label her exploitation as divine. And so, generation after generation, women's bodies were pulled into the service of gods they never chose, in rituals they never consented to for the glory of an empire that profited from their silence. But Rome's reach extended even beyond religion. Even death was not enough to free a woman from control, because if your husband died, your body still belonged to the law. And if your husband died, the system found a way to control your body even from beyond the grave. Even death could not free Roman women. If a husband died, his widow was not allowed to grieve in private or rebuild her life in peace. No, Rome enforced a law of 10 months of mourning, 10 months where she was forbidden from remarrying, 10 months where her body remained under suspicion. Why 10 months? Because Roman men believed semen lingered inside a woman's body for nearly a year. The law existed to ensure that any child she bore after her husband's death would be rightfully his, not another man's. It wasn't love, it wasn't respect, it was paranoia turned into policy. Now imagine it. A grieving woman, already robbed of her husband, now robbed of her freedom. Neighbours watching her every move, ensuring she obeyed her celibate quarantine. Any sign of intimacy, any whisper of a new relationship, and scandal would erupt. Meanwhile, widowers, men who lost their wives, were bound by no such rule. They could remarry instantly. No restrictions, no waiting, no shame. One law, two very different realities. For women, grief became a prison sentence. For men, it became an inconvenience at best, an opportunity at worst. Rome claimed this protected family honour. In truth, it exposed the empire's obsession with control. Even a widow's womb had to be policed. Even in mourning, she was property, her body still a battlefield of male pride. But if this seems cruel, remember, Rome reserved its most terrifying double standards for adultery and for family honour. But Rome saved its most terrifying double standards for adultery and family honour. Rome claimed its laws protected the sanctity of marriage. In truth, they protected only male pride. Under the Lex Julia de Adulteris, a wife caught in adultery could be executed. Her husband held the legal right to kill her, especially if he caught her in the act within his own home. But here's the hypocrisy. Men were free to cheat. They could visit prostitutes, sleep with enslaved women, or pursue affairs with those of lower status, all without consequence. For men, infidelity was indulgence. For women, it was a death sentence. And it wasn't only husbands who held this power. Fathers did too. Roman law granted ius vitae nescisque, the right of life and death. If a father believed his unmarried daughter had engaged in sex, he could kill her. No trial, no evidence, just suspicion. Picture it. A teenage girl. Her father hears whispers that she's been seen with a boy in the marketplace. No proof, just rumour. That night, he drags her into the courtyard. Neighbours watch in silence, knowing the law protects him. With a single strike, he ends her life. And Rome praises him, not as a murderer, but as a guardian of family honour. Even rape didn't protect her. If the father believed she had consented, even if she had not, he could kill her with legal immunity. Her survival depended not on truth, but on perception. So let's be clear. In Rome, women who had sex before marriage, killable. Women who were raped, potentially killable. Women who had affairs, definitely killable. Men who did all of the above, promoted to senator. It was never about morality. It was never about love. It was about property. And when property was tainted, Rome disposed of it without hesitation. But even at the highest levels of society, women weren't safe. Not even empresses. Because in Rome, sex wasn't just controlled. It was weaponized, turned into propaganda. Even Rome's most powerful women weren't safe, because sex was weaponized as propaganda. Even in the palaces of emperors, women were not free. Their bodies, their reputations, their very identities were political weapons. Take Livia Drusilla, wife of Emperor Augustus. She was exalted as the perfect Roman matron, modest, obedient, sexually pure. Whether true or not didn't matter. Her image was propaganda, proof that the imperial household embodied virtue. But the same system that crowned women as goddesses could just as easily destroy them. Look at Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. Ancient writers painted her as a monster of lust, sneaking into brothels, competing with prostitutes to see who could sleep with more men in a single night. Were the stories true? Maybe some, maybe none. But truth was irrelevant. The rumours alone poisoned her reputation, turned the public against her, and led to her execution. This was Rome's double-edged sword. Women in power were either sanctified as virginal saints or vilified as ravenous whores. Both images stripped them of humanity. Both reduced them to symbols in men's games of control. And there was no safety in status. The higher a woman rose, the sharper the blade of rumour, scandal and law waiting to cut her down. Even queens and empresses, women with crowns on their heads, were pawns on Rome's board of sexual politics, exalted one day, destroyed the next. But what if you were not an empress, not a vestal, not a noble woman? What if you were just an ordinary woman who survived assault and humiliation? Rome had a punishment for you too. It sent you the bill. And if you somehow survived, Rome still found a way to tax your trauma. Surviving assault in Rome did not mean freedom, it meant punishment. Women who endured rape or were accused of promiscuity were often labelled dishonoured, their status forever scarred. But Rome went further. It found a way to profit from their pain. Some survivors were forced to pay special marriage taxes, a financial penalty stamped onto their futures. Others were barred from temple rites, denied the comfort of religion. And in the courts, they lost protections altogether, unable to testify, unable to defend themselves if targeted again. Imagine the cruelty. A young woman survives an attack, endures whispers, endures shame, and then, on top of everything, she's handed an invoice by the very system that failed her. Rome turned trauma into revenue. This was the empire that gave us aqueducts, law codes, and philosophy. the empire celebrated for its justice and order. And yet, it wrote laws that turned survivors into outcasts and billed women for their own victimhood, civilization, or bureaucratized cruelty. Because when Rome inscribed its laws into marble, it wasn't just carving the foundation of Western culture, it was carving chains into the lives of half its people. Women weren't citizens in Rome, they were commodities. Their voices silenced, their suffering monetized, their bodies legislated into tools of power. And now we arrive at the question no one dares to ask. Was Rome really the cradle of civilization, or a cradle of chains? So was Rome really a cradle of civilization, or a cradle of chains? Rome, the empire of marble arches, aqueducts, law codes, and philosophy. The civilization praised as the blueprint of the West, but beneath the grandeur ran something darker, an empire built on the systematic, legalized control of women's bodies. Bureaucratized sexual violence, etched not in whispers or shadows, but in law books and public policy. Virginity policed like property, fertility beaten into submission, enslaved women commodified as entertainment, widows locked in mourning prisons, wives executed for adultery while men laughed in brothels, daughters killed on suspicion, their fathers praised for honour. This wasn't chaos, it wasn't fringe, it was organised, codified, celebrated. Rome's greatness was built not in spite of these horrors, but alongside them. And the most haunting truth? The echoes never died. The double standards of Rome, who is believed, who is punished, who is silenced, still ripple in the laws and expectations of societies today. Patriarchal systems, purity myths, victim blaming, they are shadows cast by Rome's marble columns across centuries. But here's the part Rome never wrote into its laws: survival. Because despite every chain, every decree, every humiliation, women endured. They resisted quietly, they adapted, they found ways to pass on stories, to raise children, to carve out dignity in a world designed to erase them. Rome tried to bury their voices, but those voices still reach us. So when you hear people romanticize the glory of Rome, remember the cost. Remember the girls buried alive, the women branded as prostitutes, the enslaved children sold as party favors. Remember that civilization's cradle was lined not only with marble, but with chains. And yet, remember too, the resilience. Because if women could survive Rome, they can survive anything. If this story shook you, make sure to like and comment so I know you want more stories like this one.